Choice Hotels get you more of what you value. Comfort Inn, it's calling your name. Save on the stay. Oh, and free waffles are yours to claim. Book direct at choicehotels.com.
This summer, serve up the Cookout Classics, Kraft Mayo and Dressing. Toss green salads with delicious ranch dressing or zesty Italian. Serve smooth, craveably creamy potato salads with mayo. We all know it's not a cookout without Kraft.
I think that first year when you're using GoRout, the kids are kind of like, this is weird. What are we doing? And then they actually experience a practice with it and they're hooked. And coaches are the same way, especially you have some old school coaches. Why do we got these phones out here? Well, just trust me, use it and you'll get used to it. And after a week, they're like, okay, no, this is the real deal.
This episode of The Art of Practice is brought to you by GoRout, the leader in on-field communication. GoRout helps coaches eliminate huddles, increase reps, and maximize efficiency with their game-changing technology. Sign up using the code COORDINATOR for 50% off setup fees at gorout.com/podcast. That's GOROUT.com/podcast using the promo code COORDINATOR for up to 50% off setup fees today. Link is in the description. Welcome back to The Art of Practice, presented by GoRout on the Coach and Coordinator Network. Every coach says they want depth, but depth does not show up on Friday night by accident. It's built Monday through Thursday through the way we structure practice, assign reps, coach the bottom half of the roster, and make sure every player understands that his development matters. Today, we're talking about coaching the guys who do not play. That means finding meaningful reps for non-starters, building roles that create buy-in, using Scout Team as a developmental tool, and making sure practice does not become a place where half the roster stands around disconnected from the work. Our guest is Brian Lowery, the head coach at Brentsville High School in Virginia. Brian shares how he thinks about developing the entire roster, scripting reps for ones, twos, and threes, creating value through personnel packages, and using practice efficiency to keep players engaged and improving. Here's our conversation with Coach Brian Lowery on coaching the entire roster.
Whether you're watching your favorite NBA team at the arena, the bar, or hanging at home, grab an ice-cold Michelob Ultra and enjoy every moment of the NBA season. Stock up today and watch your team drop buckets with a bucket full of ice-cold Ultra. Michelob Ultra. Superior light beer.
Enjoy responsibly. Copyright 2026 Anheuser-Busch Michelob Ultra. Registered light beer, St. Louis, Missouri. Must be 21 plus to order alcohol. Alcohol available only in select markets.
Welcome back to another episode of The Art of Practice, presented by GoRout on the Coach and Coordinator Network. Every coach says that they want depth, but depth does not just appear on Friday night because a starter gets hurt. Depth's developed Monday through Thursday in the way that coaches structure reps, teach the bottom half of the roster, and create meaningful work for players who may not have yet been on the field. And the best coaches don't just pay attention to the starters, they coach the entire roster. This episode should help you think about how you build practice so non-starters aren't just standing around disconnected or waiting for their turn. Like the starters, they need reps, feedback, and a role, and they need to know their development matters. And joining me to discuss that today is the head coach at Brentsville District High School in Virginia, Brian Lowery. Brian, great to have you here on the podcast.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me. This is exciting.
So, Brian, I want to get a little bit about your background here before we get into it. You know, you told me beforehand that you're a guy who didn't grow up necessarily with football, not where you lived, though you had some people who were really into football near you, and you had some great experiences along the way to learn from some recognizable names.
Yeah, I think it's ironic that the topic we're discussing today is development because I was not born into a football family or a football town or anything like that. When we moved to Connecticut in 1995, we were moving into the Yankees and Red Sox territory, right? Baseball's big there. I grew up playing baseball and stuff like that. You know, we'd always be in the backyard playing wiffle ball, which ironically, Shelton, Connecticut is where wiffle ball was originated and where their factory is. So baseball was the big thing. And like you said, an interesting factoid is I grew up right behind Dan Orlovsky. He's older than I am, so I didn't know it was Dan Orlovsky. But now knowing that he was in Shelton, where he lived and everything, I think that's pretty dang cool. So yeah, and while that's interesting, I didn't really grow to love football until we moved down to Virginia in 2003. And my parents' neighbor, he was the defensive coordinator at Liberty High School in Bealeton, Virginia. And, they're really the ones that kind of sparked the football bug in me, right? They were the ones who kind of introduced me to everything. His wife would take me to all their games, whether it was home or away. Really fell in love with it that way. And it's ironic that we're talking about development, because if it wasn't for those people, being cool with a kid who had no idea what was going on, I certainly wouldn't be here today. So yeah, and then from there after I graduated high school, went to Liberty University, and I was an intern there through the sport management program. And I sat under their offensive staff through 2 head coaches, both Danny Rocco and then his successor. And just kind of learned the game that way, and then started working in high school in 2012 and worked my way up from there.
There was a name you mentioned beforehand too, who now has become a pretty popular coach. Maybe not as big back then, but definitely a guy to learn from. Brandon Streeter was someone who you were able to at least listen in on meetings and pick up the game.
Well, and more than just the game, he's a Christian man. I'm a believer as well. And he would sit in there with the rest of his staff and talk life as well. You know how it is. Like that's half the fun of being a coach, is not just the game of football, but it's the bonds you build. And I remember one time I was sitting in there doing the charting work that they had me do as the intern. And I was just sitting there working on the whiteboard for him, and he was sitting there talking with his receiver coach. And he was talking about how when he started being offensive coordinator, at one point, he knew that he was in over his head and he was stressing. And then he realized that at some point, everybody's in over their head and they don't know what they're doing. And when you realize that feeling is not special to you and that everybody else has felt that way, it helps you kind of deal with, okay, I'm not crazy. This is normal. I'm all right. And he had no idea that he was dropping a nugget for a little 20-year-old, right? But I've carried that piece with me my entire career, because as you know, you can be an assistant for an entire career and you think you're ready for that head job, and then you get in that head job, and it doesn't matter how long you've been at that school. You don't know what you don't know, and there's going to be something that kind of just, oh man. So learning from Streeter, both football, but then just life, it was certainly a valuable experience that I'm very thankful for.
Yeah, really cool. Well, great story. I'm ready to dig into this with you. And we said the topic is making sure that we are coaching the entire roster. And I mentioned the phrase that coaching the guys who don't play. So when you hear that, coaching the guys who don't play, what comes to mind for you?
Well, for us, because we're a smaller school, Brentsville has a population of like 850 kids tops. We're one of the smaller Class 3 schools in Virginia. We have a lot of kids who play both ways. You know what I mean? Like ideally, everybody wants to have 2 platoon, but at our level, it's just not really possible. So we have a lot of 1.5 way to 2 way players, which means that you have plenty of other kids in the program who aren't at that level, you know what I mean? And they're not getting that starting time, or they're getting role player time, right? And I think to your point, the biggest thing is just making sure those kids feel valued as people, making sure they're not just token players, but they have a role and they're excellent in that role. And you value not only what they do as a role player, but just as the kid, as the person, really developing them that way. I think that's extremely important.
What's your philosophy when you look at coaching that entire roster and making sure that we're coaching guy number 1 to the guy who maybe we see as talent-wise the last guy?
Yeah, I think the big thing is making sure, like you talk, one of the topics will be structuring your practice. I think a big thing is building in that focus, right? When we're all in the moment and we're all, certainly in a game, we kind of lose track of those details. But even in practice, when things are going around, you're dealing with kids being sick or school or whatever it may be, it's easy to forget that we have to get all these guys time. And not everyone, right? Like we're not in Little League anymore, right? Like I've been coaching my son's 10U Little League baseball team this past spring, right? Like that's the time to get everybody time. And we've gone past that in high school, but we still have to try and build depth. We still have to try and get those kids reps. So I think if you build it into practice, whether it be on your actual schedule, or for us, how we do it is we make our call sheets. So we script our practices, both offensively and defensively. And then we have next to our little Excel sheet, for each call, are we 1s, 2s, or 3s, right? And in training camp, you give your 3s more time. I think once you're in the meat of the season, you got to get your starters and your 2s ready for sure. But if you don't tell yourself that the 2s need time, that the 3s need time, you're not going to get them time. So I think it has to be a conscious effort ahead of time to make sure you are developing those kids. At some point in time, at the end of the year, the season is a game of attrition, right? And who can withstand injuries and things, illnesses, whatever it may be. If you haven't been conscientious about it earlier in the year, it's going to come bite in the tail.
Yeah, it is very easy. A lot of us run fast-paced practices to let it get away from us. And, I know that's something specifically we made a point of when I was at BW of exactly like that. Our script had next to it which group was up. And in camp, it was 3 groups. When we got to the season, it was 2. We would spend some time, with our JV group or, however you want to term them to make sure they got some practice too. And then obviously they're running some scout team as it goes in college. But the intentionality, I think, is the big part. However you might do that, whether it's you're making a period the focus for them or you're putting plays into the script. What I like about scripting it that way is I could look at the reps that we were thinking for them and make sure maybe they're not ready for some of the things that the veterans who have been around for a while so that they can experience some success there too.
Right. Well, and I'm sure that most people are running several personnel groupings, right? So if you're varying that throughout your week, you should be able to find a place for kids. Like if they're a tweener, like they might not be able to run your base offense or your base defense, but they might be able to get in this package. You know what I mean? Like we had a kid last year who was a sophomore who was on JV all year and he wasn't quite ready to be a full-time guy in the playoffs or at the end of the year, but he could run this package. He could run our goal line package and be a lead blocker for us from an H spot essentially. And he did that tremendously. And giving him that at the end of the year, gives them motivation to stay in the weight room in the off season and realize I actually have a shot at being a legitimate player next year. You know what I mean? I think that's tremendous.
Yeah, I think of it that way too. And I've always said, I remember doing a presentation on this. I think I even wrote an article in American Football Monthly about using personnel groups and how it can become a big motivator because when you look at it and you have just the standard 11 guys and X, Y, Z, and boy, your depth chart makes it look very vertical. But now when I'm adding, and I would always add another letter along with that personnel group. And when I would draw up plays in the diagrams, that letter was replaced. If it was a fullback, for example, was an F and that was replacing at BW, it was our J receiver. So J came out, F went in the game. How many reps am I going to use that package in the course of a game? Well,
it varies by how the game plays out, right?
Yeah. And it was for sure we were going to use it in short yardage and whatever. But the motivator became, instead of being like the 6th tight end, I'm actually the 1st or 2nd fullback. And now I got a shot, right? Now those reps, though I might not have a ton of them, they're a lot more meaningful for me. So, and that becomes a motivator in and of itself.
The kids know that they're valued in that role.
Right. And I always tell them, like at BW, we would announce our starters on every Friday. And, the one time a kid brought it, I was like, Coach, you say we're starters all the time if we're number 1 in a personnel group. I said, yeah, you're right. Why don't we announce all the starters? And it was, I think it was like our last game. And I'm like, all right, I could get away with it the last game. So we did that. We had like 18 starters because of all the personnel groups we had grown to by that time. That was also meaningful. And I think it showed, especially for those younger guys who were coming up next, while they do take this seriously. And yeah, even though I might have a role, that role can help us win a game.
Right. No, absolutely. At the end of the day, you can only have 11 on the field at a time. I think in society, we've gone a little too far towards feelings, right? That's just me personally. But at some point in time, this is still a game. The kids do still need to be enjoying themselves, and they do need to feel valued as a part of the program. Because you can only have 11 on the field at any given time, you're going to need more than just those 11 guys in your program. So how do you keep those guys in tune? And the big thing is just making them feel valued as people.
That's exactly it. Yeah, love it. Coaches, if you're looking to maximize reps and create a game-like tempo in practice, look no further than GoRout. With instant play call delivery, real-time adjustments, and seamless integration with your existing playbooks, GoRout allows your team to get the most out of every rep. Visit GoRout.com/podcast to see how top programs across the country are using it to level up their practices. So let's get a little bit into maybe the design behind this and in the methodology. And, you talked a little bit about scripting it in, but what other things are you looking at in terms of those specific parts of practice where backups or the younger players maybe are getting the time a little bit more? Maybe there's more of the opportunity for them to be involved.
I think the worst thing that you can have, and we all know this, is just kids standing.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So I think certainly scripting not just your offense and your defense, but then scripting your special teams in there and making sure that you have 1 to 2 special teams periods every day, right? Because oftentimes they have to have value, right? Special teams can't just be ignored, but we also need to find breaks for starters in there somewhere, right? So maybe you have some offensive and defensive starters on specials, but then the rest you have role players in there, right? Making sure that they have 10-minute periods in there so they're getting extended work on the field, so they're just getting football skills that they're working on. But then from there, I think the big thing for us, and I definitely stole this from my former boss, Charlie Porterfield, when he was at Kettle Run, was we don't do varsity and JV. We do offense and defense, right? Where we have offensive coaches and we have defensive coaches, right? And so when varsity is focused on offense, the defensive coaches, they all have their position. They just coach the corners or the D-line or whatever. And JV is getting varsity level coaching on the other side the whole time that varsity is doing offense, right? So we're working on developing them. And those kids are now not just standing. And they're also not just being practice fodder, right? They're not just getting beat up the entire time by seniors. They're going against kids that are of similar ability. And then a couple of them who can withstand the beating of varsity, you know what I mean? They'll come up and be practice players with us, but it just gets them reps. They get individualized indie time. They get positional group, whether it's, the front 7 is working together. You know what I mean? Like they're actually getting reps throughout practice, and that minimizes how much time they're just standing.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. With those younger guys, those scout team guys, et cetera, is there anything you do to incentivize them? Do you do a weekly award or anything like that?
Yeah, we have done, practice player of the week. I'll be honest, something I need to do better of. I need to be more consistent in that. I'm the only teacher, I should say the only football coach on our staff who's in the building right now. So sometimes that gets lost in the hustle and bustle of the day-to-day. But that's something I need to do better, and it's something we've done in the past. And kids can feel valued by that. I also think one thing we do is, since we split varsity and JV, that way, offense, defense, we have different colored jerseys. So varsity, whether they're all in black and JV are in orange or vice versa or whatever, we kind of, when we're pulling a kid up, we kind of cheer them on in front of everybody while we're doing our stretch lines and stuff. If there's a kid who's coming up from JV to varsity and making that move, we'll take his jersey and we'll give him the other one. Everyone cheers, just kind of, recognize their hard work that way. And it doesn't mean they're going to be a starter, but obviously they've proven that they can play at this level and they'll now be legitimately with us. And if we have to send them down for a JV game because they're not getting quite the time we thought, that's fine, but they're still going to practice with varsity. So that way they're getting recognized for their hard work.
Yeah, I like that. Looking at, I think a big part of this obviously is scout team. And we talk about, especially on the Art of Practice, we talk about scout team quite a bit. And it is that opportunity for guys to be going against the best players on the team, get better, for you, and you handle it differently. As you said, practicing with the varsity, how do you make sure that stays developmental as well as being able to serve the other side, but that's a period that's developmental as well?
I think it varies by the place of your program, where you are. You know what I mean? I think as far as the development of your program itself, are your practice players able to give you enough of a look? Obviously, it's not going to be the same as other starters. This is obvious. That's why they're not starters. But are they going to give you enough of a look that your starters can develop as well as if they can grow? And if they can't, now you got to change it. And for us, at the beginning of last year, as it was my first year at Brentsville District High School, we tried to do some of those JV guys coming up, and they just weren't quite ready to give the intensity, right? And so at that point, we switched it to where it's kind of best on best for quite a bit, which really helped us to develop more on the varsity side. And then as those JV kids, we literally had them hey, do we see how hard these guys are going right now? And then we'd start to pull up, 2-3 guys here and there. And the freshmen that are now rising sophomores, I really think that they're going to have a shot to be special as they develop into seniors. They kind of caught on okay, if I want time, I got to start busting my tail while I'm in there. And it kind of, that energy just fed. You know what I mean? And I think that helped develop them mentally, which if you develop mentally, theoretically, then you follow physically, right? Then you can understand like what you have to do to hold your own, which then builds your skills, which then builds you as an overall player. Ideally, you get to the point where your culture is just intense and anyone can be plug and play in that. I think it probably just takes a few years to be able to get that if you're a new program. The other thing I think, as you're getting those young kids time, whether it be on scout team or whether it be maybe they're the threes, right, in training camp, talking with your starters as they're now the scout guys, now's not the time to go be a Wednesday warrior, right? Now's not the time to go beat up on these kids. They're the future of the program, right? Like, we need to be physical with them. Let them know, like, hey, this is what you're getting into, but we also want to develop them, right? We want to make sure that they are growing and staying interested in the program. Because if you're a freshman and you're just practice fodder and you're just getting beat on by seniors for an hour every day, you don't want to come back. And now that hurts you as you go down the road and building your program. So I think it's getting your seniors as well, your starters as well, to understand when they have to go on scout team for the 2s and the 3s. Not that we want to lay off, but we just understand like, hey, we're not trying to crush these kids, right? Like, make them counter your moves, make them feel your intensity, and then let up so you're not just running them into the dirt. If you're a starting linebacker and you manage to bust through the O-line and you got a free shot on a freshman running back, maybe we shouldn't give them a concussion right now. You wrap them up so they understand, like, you got to block better or I'm coming through, but we don't need to kill them.
Yeah, it's really important. I think one of the most meaningful wasn't a clinic, was actually, he was talking to a group of quarterbacks. Now, there were a ton of coaches there too, but when I was at USA Football, Mike Shanahan was out. We were at QB Collective, and Mike talked to the group, again, mix of players and coaches. I sat in there and took notes about protect the team and what that means, and that those exact things. Like, yeah, you have the opportunity to take a shot on this guy right here, but he's your teammate. And we want him playing, even if it's just Saturday morning for the JVs, like, we want that guy playing. So it's, I think that's being a good teammate. Like you say, it doesn't mean you do everything slow, but there's some points where you're smart about how you finish play and finish a player. So I think a really good point there. Looking at the scout team even deeper, I know for a lot of the coaches who talk on this, one of the tools y'all use is GoRout. That makes a difference in development. We think of it as this is something to make the practice more efficient, which it is. But I think tucked right behind that is actually, because it is more efficient, your time is not spent going through cards, making sure you have the next one right, making sure this guy's aligned right, because everybody's going in and looking at an 8.5 by 11 tiny little drawing, that they see it right there. They can even get notes on it. And now it goes to all those guys who are helping with the scout team actually get to coach these guys up.
Right. When I started using GoRout, we faced a team. Well, we faced one that did wing T and one team that ran single wing. And we're like, I don't know how well GoRout's going to work for that, because you gotta have to maybe talk through that. I'll tell you, we were able to still crank through stuff. And like you're saying, now you're actually talking to kids about how they can effectively, not just like, hey, line up here, but all right, hey, we really need you to do this here, right? This is how they block it. Make sure we're stepping this way, right? Or, you're talking about a pull, or you're talking about how they blitz and their tells, right? And you can put those messages in there so that way your kids are able to start picking up on their tendencies. And like you said, you're coaching football as opposed to reading a picture book. Ideally, the public education system is doing enough that they can read pictures on their own, right? They can handle that. And now you're actually moving to second level stuff of, all right, what type of technique are you running? How are you able to pedal? How are you able to do whatever? You know what I mean? And I think that's extremely important. It makes your coaches better because you're pushing yourself as a coach, and it makes your kids better because you're focusing on football and not how to line up.
And I know you've been using it since 2022. You made the statement before we got going that as long as you're a head coach, you will never not use GoRout.
Correct.
Tell me about that.
Our first year at Eastern View in Culpeper, Virginia, we went from, like 2:30 to 6 p.m. every day because we had to have time to get everything in, right? We weren't on the field that long. Some would be lifting and film and whatnot, but we were on the field probably 3:30 to 6 or something like that. And kids were drained. They were done by the end, right? And then you get to the end of the year and they're tired, right? And their bodies are giving out and it's just too much. And because Culpeper is not tremendously wealthy. You know what I mean? Like we had to go get some sponsors and things like that. And so it was a bit of a pull to get enough to be able to do that in Culpeper. And it was so worth the money. We were able to cut an hour out of our practice every day, which kept us more fresh, which kept the kids more enthused. They're more interested because they know they could have a life after. They got to go do school. They have homework, things like that. I know I've been working in whatever job since I was 15, and a lot of these kids are the same way, right? Like how many people have silver spoons where they can just hang out all day? They had to go work and things, and it gave them time to be able to do that. I just won't ever go backwards. As long as I'm a head coach, I'll 100% spend the money. And when I got hired here at Brentsville, I talked with the AD, and I was like, look, I'm not trying to come in and just ask for a bunch of stuff, but this is my one thing that's a must going into year one. Don't need new headsets, don't need a camera, whatever. We got to get GoRout. And they absolutely did it, and our kids loved it here at Brentsville. I think that first year when you're using GoRout, the kids are kind of like, this is weird, what are we doing? And then they actually experience a practice with it. You know what I mean? And they're hooked. And coaches are the same way, especially you have some old school coaches. Why do we got these phones out here? Well, just trust me. Just use it and you'll get used to it. And after a week, they're like, okay, no, this is the real deal.
Yeah, I love how you think about it, because my first thought when I saw GoRout was about getting more reps in practice. Well, this is great. I can get my guys more reps. We can get through our script faster. When we're at the college level, especially at a place like we were at, you have the depth and you can get more guys in. But it is also for teams with smaller rosters can be extremely helpful in the time you spend out on the field. We've talked on this podcast, on our network with the sprint-based football guys about load management and staying healthy over the course of the season. And part of it is like, get off the field. So you have that choice. Yes, you could get more reps if that's what you need to do and do it in an efficient manner, or you can get done with that script faster and get them out of there. And I think in that side of it too, when you have a smaller program and less guys, that becomes a motivator as well. I mean, I think, everybody as a player or a coach probably has had those moments of, man, we got 2.5 hours in this practice to go. It's daunting sometimes, especially you hit the middle of the season, like all that time you got to put in that particular day.
Right. We get on the field probably like 3:20 now, and we're probably out there, including static stretching for an hour and 40 minutes. Actual football probably like hour 25, and it goes quick. You kind of realize halfway through whether it's offensive focus one day and then, okay, we're done with offense already. It means we only got like half hour left. Okay, cool. You know what I mean? Or vice versa. I just think it's revolutionary. And I think it's worth the price every year. If you can do it, then 100%. And we even use it in 7-on-7s, right? So instead of everyone coming back and look at the binder there and your coach has to flip through stuff, we just use it there. And every single time we use it as 7-on-7, we have a high school or even a college, because one time we did it down at Virginia Tech. I'm like, wait, what is this? And I just show them as I'm calling the play. They're like, oh my gosh, that's awesome. And I was like, look, if you think it's cool for 7-on-7, it's the real deal for practice. I think it's been awesome to watch how they've grown and see all the FBS schools that they have now. I think that's tremendous. It shows, hey, maybe we're not so crazy.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Like I said, kind of a different motivation there. And we've had last year the guys who, they have some cool tracking and analytics, the guys who lead the country in the amount of reps they get in. But that's only the one aspect of it, right? It is also, what can we do to be more efficient and get these guys off the field, keep them mentally fresh, not turn it into a grind of a season. No one says like that you have to spend a certain amount on the time on the field. You just need to get through your work.
Right. Well, and I don't remember who it was that I was listening to one time, but they were talking about how we as a society fall in love with the grind. But if you think about it, when is the last time that something that was grinded ever was refined? It's just ground down. It just wears down to nothing. And that's the opposite of what we want to do.
Yeah, things break when you grind them down.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, to wrap things up, and your advice to coaches out there, a coach who wants to improve practice tomorrow, especially in terms of developing the down-the-line guys, what's your advice?
I think the biggest lesson I learned my first year as a head coach was, and it is different as an assistant, you don't quite view it this way. You always have assistants who are telling you, hey, but we're not where we want to be. We're not where we want to be. And I think as a head coach, you got to pull yourself back and look at the big picture of, okay, where did we start and where are we? And then where do we want to be and where are we? And we're not quite where we want to be, but we've come a lot further than where we started. And if you can keep that big picture, it's going to help you set up your practices of like, we can't microwave this thing, right? We also can't move at a snail's pace, but we can't microwave. We got to get these young guys reps, right? We have to make sure that practice is efficient, but we also have to make sure that it is efficiently intense, right? Where we have the right, like we were talking about, kids who are older who have to be scout team for the young guys, taking care of the program. I think that's a tremendous phrase that I'm going to steal from now on, right? And by keeping that big picture view of not being just in the moment, not being despondent that you're not where you want to be, and building that into your program as far as how you structure your practice, how you do your practice plans, I think it helps you long term. You're laying the foundation. And as we know, not that I'm that handy, but nothing of value has a crappy foundation.
Great advice, Coach. And a really good summary of this topic. So I appreciate you taking the time here on the Art of Practice presented by GoRout, sharing your ideas, sharing the way that this tool has made your program better. And I want to wish you and your program the best of luck here in 2026.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
That's a great reminder from Brian Lowery. Depth is not something you hope for, it's something you intentionally build. When coaches script reps for the whole roster, create roles for developing players, and make Scout Team a place where players actually grow, practice becomes more than preparation for the starters. It becomes a developmental system for the entire program. The challenge is simple. Look at your next practice plan and ask who is getting better today. If the answer is only your starters, there's an opportunity to build something stronger. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of The Art of Practice presented by GoRout. If you found value in this conversation, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share the episode. Visit gorout.com/podcast to learn more and take your program to the next level.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities, so do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.